Here we are back again. It's time for another review with Carmen and Jeanie. Woohoo!
Yay!
Yes, and tonight we're doing a review with an actor as the head. Not as good as Vincent Price, in my opinion, but he's still
Hmm.
one of the staples as it comes. Mr. Bela Lugosi. Gotta
Yes,
love the Bela Lugosi. And plus,
absolutely.
the movie that we're talking about is The Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yes, the
Is it on the
first
Rue Morgue? It should be on the Rue Morgue because Rue is a street.
true, but
I know it's not, that's
yes,
not, he wrote,
yes,
Poe's story is Murders in the Rue Morgue.
yeah,
But when
because
you think about it, it's like murders on the Rue Morgue. So,
very
but
true.
anyway,
Yeah,
it's the
and
1932 version, which
yes,
I think is the earliest version
I
of
bel
the story.
I believe it is, and I
Yeah.
was gonna add in too with Bela Lugosi. You can't have Universal Pictures without our favorite vampire, and
No,
so,
exactly.
but he's definitely not a
Count Dracula.
vampire here.
Yes, Count Dracula himself
Yes.
is the main man, and I actually did a little background on IMDb, just a little reading of his bios, just to
Yeah.
get a little, intro about him in my mind, and I was like, wow. Of course, he was born in Hungary,
Yes.
which pretty much ended up becoming Romania way back,
Right.
in the
Exactly.
thing. And he was born in 1882. So I was like, ooh.
Oh, okay.
And when he did this movie, when he did Murders in the Rue Morgue, he was
Mhm.
50 years old.
That's unreal when you think about it,
Yeah.
because he looked good for his age. He really
Yes,
did.
he did. He did not look like he's 50 years old. But yes, he fought in World War One. I
Oh,
did
I did
find
not
that
know
out.
that. Okay.
Yes. And he actually immigrated to Germany
Okay.
from Hungary because he had started a screen actors union apparently in his country or whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't read specifics, but I just thought that was very interesting. So he has a, definite want to be an actor before he ever came to America.
Okay. Oh,
So
that's interesting.
when he came to America, he became Dracula. He was
He
Count
he
Dracula.
he definitely did, and that was in 1931, a
Hmm.
year before this picture came out.
Exactly.
And so I did a little background on some of the other behind the scenes people. And I think, Jeannie,
Hmm.
I think you said you did some as well. So the
Yep.
director was Robert Flory, and he actually was working on the 1931 version of Frankenstein. I'll say it like young Frankenstein, but really Frankenstein.
Yes.
But he was taken off the film. But what was interesting is that in 1930, he actually like talked to Universal Pictures about making Murders in the Rue Morgue before Dracula, before Frankenstein, before the Mummy, before all of those pictures. But because they took him off the film, I don't know why. I couldn't find that out. This is how this film came about in 1932. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah. And actually, if you think about it, it worked out the way it should be.
Yeah.
Since Bela Lugosi had the Dracula, it seemed like Dracula had to come first.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh, I
just
agree.
just
Absolutely.
just to make him who it is. But one of the interesting parts is while I was reading about Bella's death and
Hmm.
his burial,
It's
and he
interesting.
was buried in his Dracula cape.
Yes.
But it wasn't the one he did in the movie. It was just a Dracula cape and everything. He was dressed like Dracula, but it wasn't from his movie costume. And
Okay.
he was
Okay.
buried that way. And I'm going, that's just odd. But okay,
Yes. It's like,
it's very
was he
interesting.
wanting to come back?
Well, it is Bela Lugosi, so it could be, which
Yes.
actually makes it interesting when you move into the Murders in the Rue Morgue for the movie.
Yeah.
That's the one thing about is when you hear him speak. you can't help but automatically just hear Dracula.
Yes, I agree.
And a lot of that had to do with his Hungarian accent. Even
Oh,
though
yeah.
he hit it pretty well, but every once in a while it would definitely slip in.
Oh, yeah. And it's like it's part of him, so that makes total
Mhm.
sense. Well,
Yes.
and I was gonna say, kind of like thinking about, I'll be back, like the Terminator, I'll be back. It's
Yeah.
more, I'll be back.
Yes, I would be back. I want to suck your blood. Okay.
Yes. All right.
Uh,
But yeah, yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Well, we are going to talk about
But
blood for this movie, but not yet.
see,
Not yet.
not yet. No, let's talk about at the beginning of the movie, and which is one of the things that really, I guess, bugs me
Okay.
about, the story itself. Poe wrote the story, and yes, he placed it in France in
Mhm.
1840.
Right.
So, but the beginning of the movie is got Paris 1845. So they didn't put it the same year, but they were at least in the same decade, I
Close.
guess.
Yeah,
Or
close
close.
range. Yeah, because it came out in Graham's Weekly, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, Graham's magazine, and yeah, April 1841 is when it
Mhm.
was published. So,
Yes. Yes. But basically he said it during the time of 1840 in the setting for the
yeah.
happening. So,
Hmm.
but one of the things is that, when the movie opens, it's like you're at a carnival. You're
Yes.
watching, these people swinging back and forth in one of these cool swings, and you're seeing all these people mulling around and listening to all, it's kind of like the old carnivals where you
Oh
got,
yeah.
but instead of, I got thrown back to like Buffalo Bill Cody's traveling show because they had the Native Americans and the
Mhm.
Custer and all that kind of stuff, and it was definitely time period centric
Yeah,
when it
appropriate.
came
Yeah.
to came to what was happening. But what I thought was very interesting is everything is written in English on
Mhm.
all the banners and everything until you see the outside with the gorilla.
Yes.
Then that is written in French.
Yeah, in which you would think to make a piece that where
Mhm,
it is the setting is France, they
mhm.
would have changed up some of those things and put the wording in French.
Yeah. I mean, and, even have some of the actors use more French words. Maybe
Mhm.
not speak French, but at least use more French words.
Yeah.
It was very unusual, but at the same time, it was very apropos because you didn't have a lot of vast actors at that time, or
Right.
variety actors, rather, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So you had to use what you had. But
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I did like how, they kept it fair to that point to where it was more of a carnival, but I did not like how they made Dupin.
Dupine, Dupine.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Every time I say Dupin, I expect an E at the end of his name. There's not an E at his name. It's just,
Oh, I
and
know.
that's why I say Dupin.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so
just the French way.
yes,
Yeah,
I
that's
know it's
all.
just weird, but I did not like the portrayal of how they made him a medical student. I understand why they did it,
Yes, yes. Yeah,
but that
yeah.
was a little too much off of the story for me.
Well, and really, and the way Leon Ames, I really do like that actor because he went on to do some of more light to the dark movies like
Yeah.
Meet Me in St. Louis. He was the father in By the Light of the Silvery Moon, Moonlight Bay, which
Mhm.
actually Moonlight Bay came first. And so I really do like him a lot. But yes, and his medical student like part, it became more of a forensic, like criminologist, more than a medical student, I thought.
Yeah, and that's the one thing is I think that's why they were going in that direction to
Hmm.
make it that way, which
Yeah.
that's one I do appreciate because they brought in a lot of the forensic part of that, and
Yeah.
it made it more that way. Um, but I don't know. It just seemed that at first he seemed like a bumbling idiot, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that adding in the love story, which,
Yeah.
as we know, they did that in another version of this movie, which we're not going to talk about yet.
No, no,
But
not yet.
I think that, to me, that was part of why they kind of made him. He was like in love and, not focusing at
Mhm.
first, but then all of a
Yeah.
sudden he's got his ratiocination all in
Mhm.
check and deducing everything.
Yeah, it's like he finally gets on point,
Yeah,
especially because she becomes one of the targeted individuals.
right, right.
And
And
I think that's part of the thing that got him focused.
yeah, I agree. And the another thing that I was not I was like, why did they do this? Is they changed his first name. It was not C. Auguste, it
Mm-mm.
was Pierre. And it was kind of like, wonder why, why would they would change his name? There wasn't really a need to.
Now, it seems like they were making it more generic French, in my opinion.
Maybe because Pierre is a more well-known name than Auguste. So,
Yeah, it's kind of like like John or something in
mhm,
America.
yeah,
Uh, but I mean, I love the sets. I love how they made the outlines of the movies and you
yeah.
know the things like that. But I will say I did read a certain critique about Bela Lugosi and this
Hmm.
particular movie, and that some people made that the only thing that was different in any of Bela Lugosi's movies was his unibrow.
Oh,
That's the only thing that ever changed. Everything was the same. Like every time you watched it, it was just like watching Dracula all over again.
oh
But
yeah,
his
and
unibrow was the only thing that changed.
well, and the unibrow, especially like looking at the movie poster for your cover,
Uh-huh.
is it looks like a bat, and
Yeah,
which
it
is
does.
that it's like an understated, vampire reference, and it kind of looks like a V as well for vampire.
Yep, yep. But I just thought that was just ironic because that was one of the things that I thought of when I saw the first, when he first appears in the movie. I'm going, oh my lord, that is the unibrow. I'm like, can we just not, because it looks like it's going to take off on its own. But then I started thinking, I wonder if they kind of made it and kept it that way to make him more relatable to the ape.
That would make sense because think about his henchmen as
Mhm.
well looked like
Uh-huh.
like an ape man, like he would be a cousin of someone from Planet of the Apes.
Yeah,
The way because he was hunched over, just the
mhm.
he had the way his hair was and everything. So it's almost like an evolution of you have the gorilla, which that's something else I want to talk about. The
Mm,
gorilla, then you have his henchman, and then you have Dr. Miracle, I think is how
yeah,
they pronounced it, which I kept wanting to go, it's miracle, but it miracle with the K makes more sense.
yeah. Just thought that was kind of interesting, and I could see that being a focal point.
Hmm. Yeah.
With all
And
those little ambiances, and like you and I
yeah,
had been discussing earlier about the how it was titled "Murders on the Rue in the Rue Morgue on the Rue
yeah.
Morgue," whatever.
In,
Uh, well,
in.
it just still bothers me. Just still bothers me.
Take it up with Poe.
Murders.
Take it up with
Yeah,
Poe.
I will. But Murders in the Rue Morgue, Poe was all about writing for individual audiences because it's all about the readers. And then
Yes.
we had the discussion about the movies where they would take license when they
Hmm.
would create these scripts and everything, where they had to make it more of a broad general story.
Yes.
And it just made it interesting in my opinion, and I can understand why, because at the time in the early 1920s, as in the early 1800s,
Hmm.
science was still in its, infancy, and it was still growing and still experimentation. But it just always was just amazing to me the things that they would perform scientifically
Yeah.
to to try to, create things or anything.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess that's the one divergent that I did not like about this story was how he was a mad scientist in the
Yeah.
aspect of what he was trying to accomplish.
Right, and
I
I
mean,
think the name Miracle, like, really looking at it looks like miracle,
yeah,
and the experimentations that he was doing, or the experiments he was doing, looking for a miracle cure with, the blending of the blood,
yeah,
with the gorilla and the human.
yeah. It just and what I think also is ironic, he was talking about at the very beginning of the movie, talking about evolution. And
Yeah,
it wasn't that long after the movie when the monkey trials
very true. Yeah.
took place here in
Mhm.
Tennessee. So,
Yeah.
it hit upon a lot of different aspects that was going on societal wise,
Yeah.
especially scientifically.
Yeah.
And no, go ahead.
I totally agree. It definitely the timing was right for it to be recognized, noticed, and attended in the movie theater based
Hmm.
on the premise of it with, like you said, what's going on in society.
Yeah. I mean, so you had, and let's just be honest, nobody else could pull off Dr. Miracle as well as Bela Lugosi.
Yes,
I
I'd
mean, come
agree.
on.
Yeah,
He
and
was just, you had to like him.
mhm,
You're
and
like, "Eh, he's better than the idiot that, Dupin." So,
oh yeah. Well, one thing that I kind of recognized, and I thought about this with, what we have looked at researching the Corman films, how, you had to have, a number of different acts because it, like almost like a
mhm,
play, because Poe's story is one act and you need to
yep,
add maybe a two or a three. So I felt like the beginning of the movie, the carnival scene, the love interest, all of that was like act one to set up, provide back some background knowledge of, Dupine, Camille
mhm,
L'Esplanade, which I was happy that they kept that name for the,
yeah,
his love interest and her mother. And then it was like, it was almost like a switch flipped, because as soon as the murders happened and you had all the different, characters from in the building that were coming in, and the descriptions of the different languages, all of that was almost identical to the story, which that part I really loved because that's such an integral part of Poe's story.
yeah, it was, in my opinion, the meat of his story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
That's the main reason why Dupine figured it out with some other things.
And which leads into what we've discussed with Poe Unplugged and other things like on 6 Degrees and stuff
Mhm,
about Poe's work, that there's even the beginning and the end are not really beginnings and ends with his stories.
mhm.
They're so open ended that the movie directors and writers and stuff have carte blanche to create a broader and more, you know, in depth, if we want to
Yeah,
say it that way,
yeah,
story,
mhm,
because Poe just leaves it. It's like he writes what he wants to, and he's like, okay, I'm done with that story. If anybody wants to add to it, if there's anything missing, you
mhm.
know, come on, Jules Verne. He wrote the first fan fiction for Edgar Allan Poe.
Right, exactly.
So it just makes sense that, yes, in this movie, they had to fill it in. They made it a romance, made it a love story, which
Mhm.
was par for the course at the time because movies
Absolutely.
were growing.
Mhm,
And but then you get to the part with the murders and the many different people and the interviewing, to where that's where you're like, ooh, I see Poe.
yeah,
That is Poe,
mhm.
and it still sticks that way. So I love how they did pay homage and kept that to, to almost perfect degree of Poe. If they
Yeah,
hadn't, I don't think it would have worked at all, even with Mr.
yeah.
Lugosi as the lead.
Absolutely, and the another part that I thought was really neat, it wasn't totally, identical to the story, but y Dupin had his sidekick who was cooking and kind of taking care of him and,
Mhm.
asking him, "Why are you doing all this, stuff with, the
Yep.
corpses and things?" And so but they gave him a name, his name was Paul. Now he wasn't the narrator, but giving Dupin the sidekick really, especially paid that homage to Poe as the
Mhm.
father of detective fiction. I just, because that's the formula that so many authors have used and continue to use, and probably will
Mhm.
continue to use, past the time we're in existence. And so that I was really happy about.
And it falls perfectly with the theater, with having a straight man.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
with either whether it's comedy or whatever, there's always that co-anchor, that
Yeah.
co-actor, that leading, you have the leading male or female, but then at the same time you have the supporting
Mhm.
that you have to have, and that is good that they gave this one a name, did not make him an unnamed narrator or unreliable narrator, but
Right.
they gave him a reason, and that was to reinforce the character of Dupin. So,
Yes, and provided a little comic relief, which,
mhm.
as we know, with horror, you've gotta have that balance of some comedy.
Oh, yeah, because a little too much gore and too much depression, it's like, "Yeah, why am I watching this again? No
Yeah,
one
then
wants to
then
know."
then to me, if you have too much gore, it takes away from the actual storyline and the plot,
Mhm.
and I think it's like you lose what you're really looking at to
Mhm.
figure out, in this case, the murder, but it just the gore is not necessary, and Poe was a master of that. I mean, yes, some of his stories had some gore, but it was beautifully written in a way that it didn't ever make me squeamish, but I guess I'm a
Yeah.
little bit different, but
Well, and it also comes down to the definition of horror and how
yeah.
it's changed, you
Mhm.
know, because I still remember the first time I showed the believe it was 1934 version of Frankenstein to
Mhm.
my theater students,
Mhm.
and they were more unnerved because of the story, because there was no blood, there was no
No.
gore. It
Mm-mm.
was all about the suspense, anticipation, and
Yeah.
that to me is what makes horror.
Yeah.
It's not the blood, the gore, the grotesque,
No.
that's just like, "Oh, look, that's just special effects.
Yeah.
There goes someone's hand, someone's like,"
Yeah.
Now,
It's
there are
not
certain things of
necessary.
yeah, there's certain things that's too much anticipation, and we won't go into that, but Mike Myers, good lord, the man couldn't walk 5 miles but
Oh.
anyway, so
Well, and I wanna add something, because you mentioned Frankenstein. So, the cinematographer, his name was Karl Freund,
mhm,
and one of the things that I read was that this story, in a way, some people in that time compared it to Frankenstein's storyline, just basically just like the not the necessarily the visuals, but the actual, I guess creating something new
yeah,
from other parts, I guess would be the best way to describe it. But then visually, then this is the same article I found. Visually, the 1920 film "The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari," it was compared to that with the visual aspects of how it was put together some with the cinematography. And so I thought that was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, and I can understand from that point of view because you have to look at those time periods. They didn't have a lot to work with.
No, no, because it was all, I mean, for the most part, they were creating everything that like the standard for what's to come.
Mhm. And so it would pay, and they didn't have a lot of budget because this
Right.
was still like the infancy of movie making.
Mm-hmm.
It had just got into actual video and audio,
Yeah.
whereas only like maybe what 10 years earlier it was just strictly video.
Yeah, exactly. With the cards.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, and a lot of people always lump all the horror genre together.
Yeah.
Like they want to throw Frankenstein and Dracula and everything else. Oh, let's just all lump them into one giant monster.
Yeah. And it's
But
not.
at the same, yeah, they're not. There's ambiance and there's nuances to each one. And even though you might use similar actors and
Mm-hmm.
similar settings, there's still the slight difference, but I can see how they would take the murders in the Rue Morgue and compare it to something like Frankenstein because Dr. Morocco was all about creating a new monster.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
if you think about it, he had no idea what he would actually create if he crossed
No.
a human, the human DNA with the ape DNA.
Mm-hmm.
He was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna experiment. Let's see what we're gonna come up with."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was basically looking for the perfect female for that job. And
Mhm.
he didn't quite make it there, but we won't go
Mm.
into spoilers.
No, but he also, he was, in my opinion, the perfect serial killer.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
He was he was creepy, definitely.
Yep.
He
Mm-hmm.
had he had all the right charisma
He
to
did.
get what he wanted,
He was an
and
introvert.
yep.
He
He had
had
followers,
he had
so he was very good at connecting to people.
mm-hmm. He had, his kind of signature with what he
Yep.
was doing. And yeah, Jeannie, you're right. He is a great example of a serial
Serial
killer.
killer, yep. But
I
yeah,
talked a lot today at school, so I'm
it's
fumbling my
okay.
words. Oh,
Trust me, I feel that way, and I just talk to my cat most of the day.
yep. Well,
So at
and
least I say something more than meow. So,
yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, the other one other thing that I had hinted about earlier was okay. So in the post story, we have the orangutan, and
uh-huh.
the reason why I said it like that is because I listened to Christopher Lee's version,
Yeah.
the audio version of Murders in the Rue Morgue to kind of
Mhm.
make, remind myself of all the elements of the story versus the movie. And that's how he said it. But in the movie, it's a gorilla. And I thought
Mhm.
that was very interesting. Why do you think that they chose a gorilla over the orangutan?
I believe they chose it because they needed to keep consistency with the storyline that they had written as the screenplay.
Yeah.
I don't believe that an orangutan would have met the believability that they were going for.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, even in today's society, when you look at scientific experimentation and looking at the scientific, uh, what do you call it?
Uh,
Genealogy. Let's just look at
yeah.
the scientific genealogy of the
Okay.
evolutionary or adaptations
Mm-hmm.
of many animals. The orangutan is not a close uh, adaptation to humanity as the ape is.
When
So
you
that's
think
why,
of the premise of evolution, that's true.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that does
So,
make sense. Yeah.
and if you also think about it, the orangutans were not as plethora. as much in that time to
Mhm.
get to, because most of the time the orangutans you would only find them in the areas of like Borneo and on Indonesia, and that's
Right.
their natural habitats.
Mhm.
Whereas in Africa, which was a vast, area that England had already colonized,
Mhm.
that's where you found most of the gorillas, was in the rainforest and the Congos,
Yeah.
and a lot of people were, illegally poaching and, stuff
Mhm.
like that. So,
Yeah. Well, and in
um,
Poe's story, if I remember this correctly, so the sailor character in the
mhm,
actual story of from Poe
yeah,
was not in the movie. I kind of felt like Dr. Morocco was probably the replacement, but then they went, 10 steps, further with him
yeah,
because of it was written for Bela Lugosi.
yeah,
But I think the sailor and his like comrade found the orangutan in, I think, Borneo. I can't remember exactly, but
yeah, pretty
yeah,
sure
they
it's Borneo.
they captured him and kept him, and then the orangutan was like watching him shave and became fascinated with it, and that's part of the reason that what the murders happened the way they did.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that they diversed or digressed away from
Hmm.
Poe's story.
Yeah.
But I can understand whoever was the screenwriter who was creating this generalized audience version
Yeah.
had to come up with something that would play well.
Yeah, and something just came to my mind, and I'd be very curious to look this up when the filming started.
Mhm.
But in 1933, do you remember what movie came out that would fit within all of the monster movie madness that has been redone and him, this particular, animal matched up with other animals, King Kong, the
Yep,
1933 version. So that would have been right after this. I guarantee you they were filming it at this time.
more than likely. And that would
So
fit with
that would, yeah.
You know,
And I think
Universal's advertisement, definitely.
yeah. So was King Kong, was it Universal? I'm going to look it up.
I believe so. I don't think it was Paramount.
Yeah. Let's see. Because I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, now you got me curious.
Well, it just dawned on me that it was something you said just with within the keeping with the evolution and the having the gorilla rather than the orangutan. That all made sense, and there was something you said that made me think of that, and I was like, this makes perfect sense with
Yeah.
and keeping in line with it was actually RKO Radio Production Pictures is the first film in the King Kong franchise. Let's see.
And they even have it as a dinosaur adventure.
Oh, interesting.
That's one of the that's one of the tags I have on IMDb.
Hmm.
Let's see. Hey, it won three awards.
And I know we're digressing a little bit, but
Yeah.
this, if people liked this film in 1932 and then King Kong came out right after, and it could have been, if this was RKO,
Yeah.
they could have heard about Universal creating this movie and said, we're going to have a bigger ape.
Yeah, and it would make a lot of sense to,
Yes. Yes.
plan that ahead because, well, as
Yeah.
I said, this is in its infancy and uh they needed to make it to where it would last.
Yeah. I,
So
I totally agree. Well, what
yeah.
other, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that that just leads credence to why they used an ape instead of an orangutan even more.
Yeah. And again,
But
I don't know, I did not look up the history because that fact just it just popped into my brain. If I had thought about this earlier, I would have done some more research. So
yeah,
we might have found a interesting connection here of,
yeah,
what was, the between different companies back then, movie companies, where they were competing, with different entities as the villain.
exactly. And what is even more uh interesting or questioning, you know, thinking about is
Mm-hmm.
Poe, since his early 1840s
Mm-hmm.
or 1800s,
Yeah.
orangutans once more were not one of these popular animals that was showing up in carnivals and stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
So how did Poe get his idea for just an orangutan?
That's a good question.
So what spurred him to say, "Oh, was he like traveling one day and the because he was living near ports, so ports of
Mm-hmm.
call when they were bringing in the back then it was before the laws had been passed to hopefully preserve the animals that we've lost.
Right.
Um, we don't have that anymore, but to see him on the sidelines being offloaded from all these ships because they've been taken from their natural habitat.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he just happened to see one that was in a cage and was like, "What is that?"
Yeah, that is very true. Or just, he was a very learned man, and he could have learned about them in some of his studies when he was, a young boy, or his time at University of Virginia. I mean, there is no telling.
No, and that would be
That's a
something
great
interesting.
question. If I wish we could time travel and go ask him.
Yeah, because I could see Poe writing a story that would match the screenplay that they made for the 1933 version
Yeah.
about him crossing, uh, animal with human to try to make that experimentation and using a gorilla
Mm-hmm.
instead of an orangutan.
Yeah.
And here's a nice little tidbit of information. The orangutans have almost been wiped out and their habitat is so bad because of gum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because of the
Oh,
habitat, that's where they get most of the gum trees and stuff like
okay.
that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's kind of sad. And every time
It
I think of an
is.
orangutan, I have to think of the two, to think of King Louie from Jungle Book
Uh-huh.
and want to walk like man, talk like man. And that just popped into my head when thinking about this particular movie, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, where he was trying to create an animal, an ape that would be more man-like.
Yes.
And then in the Jungle Book movie, where the orangutan is wanting to be more like man.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
and then of
All right. You
course I
found
have
the
to, yeah,
irony. You found it.
yeah, found the irony. So, but overall, the movie itself would not be as successful, in my opinion, without having Bela Lugosi as that particular character.
I agree. I agree. So,
It did give a pretty good homage to the story that Poe
mm-hmm.
wrote. I will
Yeah.
have to say that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like some of the liberties that they did take, but I can understand why they did them.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I
So,
like
well, since you're explaining kind of,
them.
doing your
Mhm.
kind of summation,
Yep, yep.
do you want to give your black cat hisses and your raven caws?
I will start with my Raven cause
Okay.
because I will give a 4 for my Raven cause
Okay.
because even though it is not, in my opinion, the most aligned with the story,
Mm-hmm.
it does keep well within a certain point to give credence to the original author for me. So I
Yeah.
do give the 4 Raven cause.
Out of
However,
six. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. However, I will have to do my two black cat hisses.
So now, why just two? You sometimes
Well,
this may be the lowest you've given.
it is, and that goes along with why I gave the four Raven calls, because the two
Okay.
black cat hisses would be uh so low because it is well enough, even though they changed a little bit, a little bit of the storyline and everything,
Hmm.
they did make it good, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Okay.
So it wasn't so far off the mark that it made you really, really regret them attaching Edgar Allan Poe's name to it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
So,
because there's more Poe in this film than there is in some of the ones that were filmed in like the late
mhm,
60s that basically it's Poe in name only.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Not the
that's
Corman
why,
films, but I'm talking about some other ones.
yeah, some of the others took way too much liberty to where they just, in my opinion, stole the name that Poe wrote the story under, but it has nothing tied to the story.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, they kept the name Murders in the Rue Morgue. They actually kept the central plot line for Poe's
Mhm.
story of
Yeah.
being murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yeah,
So,
and the style of the murder
yeah,
and the the intricacies of all the people and the accents and all of that right after that. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I that's why I give it just the two. Because even though they did take liberties by changing the orangutan and other things like
Hmm.
that, I do believe they did it for storyline purposes, plot line purposes,
Yeah.
and they did it well. I'll
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah, Universal was making great films during that time frame, so they kind of
Mhm.
they really had a handle on what they were doing for this being a whole new medium of entertainment.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I've thought about it, because I've seen this movie more than once, and I've been going back and forth, and that's why I wanted to listen to the actual post story again,
Mhm.
just so I'm making sure I'm keeping the Poe versus the film separate, and
Right.
so I would probably give it I'm trying to decide between 3 and 4 Raven calls, and I think I'm probably leaning toward 4 because when you look just like you said, with the Poe elements that they kept, those are some of the most important.
Yeah.
But and I do like the film. Like it's I like the film in general. If it was a story that didn't have anything to do with Poe, I would like the movie regardless, I think.
Exactly.
And you've got Bela Lugosi, and like I said, I like Leon Ames. He has done more, comedy and things that I've seen previously, but I think once they took, like you said, kind of that bumbleness out of him,
Hmm.
he became a version of Dupin. He became more of an American version, but you know, kind of to me as more of a younger Dupin, not the
Right.
Dupin we know from Poe. And so, yeah, I would probably give it 4 Raven calls, but I'm actually going to give 3 Black Cat hisses
Ooh.
because I think that this really was more about Bela Lugosi, which I love him. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
Dracula is my favorite Universal Pictures film of the monsters of the monster
Right.
cycle. But I just felt like they put too much emphasis on him and not enough on Poe, even though they kept, again, those elements that are sacred to the story pretty close to accurate.
Right.
And I'm, and with the route they were going with the whole, the perfect, human with the blood and all that kind of stuff, intermingling the blood or the DNA. I mean, they didn't call it that, but the blood, you know, I'm not that upset that they put in a gorilla instead of the orangutan, but I think that the love interest really took away from the film. And and there's another version out there that, like I said, we're going to talk about way later when we get to
Mhm.
it. And the love interest, again, it takes away from what Poe was doing. And there's a time and a place for it. And I think this film could have been made without the, Camille being the love interest. She could have just played her part just like it was in the story.
Well, I agree wholeheartedly. That love
Yeah.
story should not have been it should not have been an addition, but knowing that what they were creating as far as the movies and the infancy of it, I can
Yeah.
understand.
I
And that's
can
why
too.
I
Yeah.
wasn't that upset with it because even though yes, it was a love story, she
Mhm.
was yes, at one point I was rooting for her to, bite it, but that's typical.
Yeah,
But
and the end of the movie I thought was a little lackluster. I don't wanna give anything away for people that
yeah,
haven't seen it. And so I think that kind of puts me over the edge with adding, like, all that in to give
yeah.
3 black cat hisses instead of 2 like you did. So,
And it makes sense, because I mean, it was an ending. That's the one thing that's why I didn't put too much emphasis on it because I'm like, it ended.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we really didn't talk about it at all because you're right, the movie ended, and that's what's wrong with that part of the movie.
Yes, it just ended. But
Not
that's
leaving not leaving room for a cliffhanger for a sequel, it just ended.
ended. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, it's like whereas Poe kind of leaves something on most of his stories that you can interpret and create
Mhm.
for a further story. That was this, I will have to say that's the one thing I'm like, oh, well, it just ended.
Yeah, it definitely
Okay.
did.
But
So, well, I
yeah,
I enjoyed revisiting this film, and
yes,
this is our first one that wasn't a silent film, so that was kind of exciting.
yes, it reached the next level of progression. So now we had both the moving parts, but we also had the audio with it. So that was good.
Absolutely. And I don't have my notes handy. I do not remember what film we're going to be reviewing next month. Do you remember,
If
Jeanie?
if I remember correctly, it was the Black Cat
Yes.
because
Yes.
that is the next one I believe on. Let me check my list here.
Okay.
Hold on. It's my wonderful computer is or my phone uh is being a pain right now.
Understandable. And if you
But yeah,
can't,
I'm pretty
but
sure
I
it's
think
it's the Black Cat. It's the version of the Black Cat.
with Bela Lugosi.
Yes. And that's what's even more ironic. It's the Bela Lugosi
Yes,
version of the Black Cat.
And Boris Karloff. So you got a
Oh
double
yes, the
billing
double
of,
feature.
yeah, big monster time, but not
Ye-
really. But yeah.
Yes, it's gonna be good either
Or
way.
no, or
So
wait, hold on. Am I getting it confused with The Raven?
hold on. I don't know. I didn't think so, but
We have to look it up because I don't remember. Because
all
The
right, hold on.
Raven, Bela Lugosi is also in The Raven.
Yes, that's true. Hold on. Let me. I've got it up here. Let
Okay.
me.
Oh
Let
yeah, no,
me.
we're right. 1934, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi.
Yes,
Yeah, we're right.
exactly.
Yay!
The Black Cat, 1934.
Yes.
Because the Raven, the 1935 version, is
Yes.
next. And
Yes.
so, yeah, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, they're in both of those together.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, they're in the Black Cat and in the Raven. So we're going to be doing the Black Cat next, 1934 version.
hmm Yeah, that's a good one too. I will
Yeah.
enjoy revisiting that one as well. Uh, Before we go, one other thing that we wanted to mention is please plan on our live YouTube Halloween special on Halloween, and it's going to start at 7 p.m. Central Time. We'll just tune into our YouTube channel, Poe Unplugged, and Jeanie and I are going to be dressed up in character, and we have some special guests that we think that you will absolutely love what they're going to do, and we're just going to have a great Halloween costume time.
Yes, we're going to have our own Poe Halloween spectacular.
Yes, it
Whoop,
will be
whoop.
it'll be
It's going to
fun.
be a potastic Halloween.
Yes. Did you say Powoween?
Halloween.
Poldoween.
Halloween.
Okay. Okay. Spell that for me later.
Yeah, I'll try. I'll come up with something.
Oh,
Halloween.
yes, and
Halloween.
so our Halloween special this month is it's taking over our degree episode. So if you have been missing our degree episode, that's why. And so that is going to be it. And then we also have our Poe Unplugged on Tuesday, the 29th
Night. Mm-hmm.
at 7 p.m. Central, and go to our website, click the Poe Unplugged tab, register, and we're going to be reading Hop Frog. So if you want a little bit of revenge, come hang out with us and talk about Hop Frog.
And what better time of the year than during close to Halloween to get the
Absolutely.
revenge?
Yes, there's definitely some tricks up Hop Frog's sleeves.
Exactly. That's the pesky little frog.
Yes.
All right.
I think, Jeanie, I think we covered it pretty
Yep.
well.
We have done our review for the morgue today.
Yay! So,
Woohoo!
on that note,
We
we
are
are Poe
oh,
out.